then in terms of creating a vision for your life, understanding the lessons from your crucible, understanding how you designed, what you're off the charts passionate about, which will often be linked to beliefs, or it can come from the ashes of your crucible. And then just take baby steps, try different, things, try different small journeys of vision, and gradually over time, a vision that you're off the charts passionate about will happen.
Welcome to Onward Live, a live stream focused on encouraging you to create a life you love living now. Let's go beyond success to significance. Being clear on our why is crucial. It requires doing the inner work, finding ourselves, getting to know ourselves, embracing our inner child, shedding social conditioning, and letting go of perfect. We know obstacles make us stronger. We can dream big and take action. Believe you can, and you're halfway there. I invite you to tune in every week and engage with me and my inspiring guests. Invite your friends. Let's make time for what matters most in our lives. Let's move onward together.
Hello, whoever's watching. Let me know you're here. I see that we've got some people watching. Let me know in the chat. I'm Emily Harmon. I'm host of Onward Live, and also this ends up turning into a podcast as well. So in a few weeks, this episode will be published as a podcast. So thank you for those who watch and to those who also listen to the podcast. I was just doing that video play, and at the end, how I say, let's make time for what's most important in our lives. And tonight was such a fun night because I went out to dinner with my parents. It's their 60th wedding anniversary. And I gave them a book that had a lot of pictures of, them before they were married, and then while, their marriage, and then, as they raised their kids. And it was so fun. Hi, Sonia. It was so fun to give them that book. And one of the pictures was of me and my dad and my brother and sister visiting the Naval Academy when it was probably 1973, I think, when women weren't allowed at the Naval Academy, right? And then, so it's the three of us. And then beside it, I put a picture of me on my graduation day from the Naval Academy and my sister, who was a midshipman at the time, saluting me, and my brother saluting me because he was a student at the Air Force Academy. So all three of us went to academies. It was pretty cool. And it was just so fun to be able to go out to dinner with my parents. I know people that are my age, 59. I'm really enjoying. And I just got a note said, oops, one of your streams is having connection issues. I'm not sure which one, but stream is trying to restore the connection. So hopefully they can. We shall see. You never know with Restream. But anyway, that was a fun event to celebrate that. And now I'm going to bring in my guest, and Warwick, welcome. And I want to introduce you a little bit. So before we start, you're the founder of Crucible Leadership, which is a philosophical and practical breakthrough for turning business and personal failures into the fuel for igniting a life of significance. And you were only 26 when, as the fifth generation heir to the media empire bearing your family name, you led and lost a multi-billion-dollar public takeover bid. And the result was that the company that was founded by your great-great-grandfather slipped from family control after 150 years. And you call that a crucible moment. And you're also a Wall Street Journal bestselling author of the book Crucible Leadership, Embrace Your Trials to Lead a Life of Significance. And you have an undergraduate degree in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford University and an MBA from Harvard. And you're an international Coach Federation, ICF certified executive coach. So welcome. Glad to have you here, Fairfax. I was on your Warwick. I was on your show a few months ago. 6 months ago, maybe? And now you're on my show.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you so much, Emma, for having me. And I love that you talk about significance and how you move onward from adversity. So a lot of cross currents. So I love your message.
Yeah. And just creating a life that you love living. I mean, how do you go from what you went through with your family business to creating a life that you really love and to a life of significance, and then to not let your worst day define you. So I'm really excited to learn from you tonight.
Well, thank you. Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about your story. I kind of highlighted it a little bit, but what do you want to say about it? What happened with you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you did in the intro give some context, but yeah, I grew up in this 150-year-old family media business in Australia. It had newspapers, TV, radio, magazines. It had the US equivalent, or the Australian equivalent, I should say, of the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post. It was a massive company with the opinion leaders of our country. So growing up, my parents felt like, that I should be the parent or certainly a leading figure in the company. And so I spent my whole life preparing for that role. So, yes, I did my undergrad at Oxford, like my dad and some other relatives, worked on Wall Street, got my MBA at Harvard Business School. But it wasn't so much about leading a life that I would love. It's leading a life that other people felt I should. And it's funny, obviously, as you're very well aware, in the US, I think it's West Point, they talk about duty on a country. I think that was a Douglas MacArthur speech. And I've never served in the military, but that sense of duty, I mean, it's hardwired into me. So
Mm-hmm.
whether I enjoyed it or not was irrelevant. It was all about the mission, the cause. And there was almost this sense that, having a media company like that, a newspaper company, it felt like you were serving your nation in a sense. It was like a sacred cause.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there was other cross currents. It was founded by a person of faith and I'm a person of faith. There's all these cross currents. So basically, where the Crucible happened is in early '87. My dad died. He was in his 80s. I was from his third marriage. There was rumors of instability in the share market. Part of the company was publicly held. And so I felt like, as my parents did, the company had drifted from the vision of the founder. It wasn't being well managed. So in my youthful naivety, as I was finishing Harvard Business School, literally by day I'm in class and by night I'm on the phone to investment bankers. I mean, it's at 26 years old, it's just crazy stuff in hindsight. So armed with a lot of youthful naivety and idealism, which idealism is not bad. It's got to be focused in the right direction. So I launched this $2.25 billion takeover. And from the beginning, things went wrong. Other family members sold out. They didn't really believe in my vision. Didn't want to be locked in a company run by a 26-year-old. I mean, who would? The October '87 stock market crash shut our asset sales. So by the end of the year, we had an unsustainable level of debt. By 1990, 3 years later, Australia went into a big recession. Newspapers are very cyclical, and the company went under. So here I was trying to, restore the company to the image of the founder. Whether that's true or not, whether it was necessary is a whole nother discussion.
Right.
But so then in, I guess, early '91, I moved to the US. My wife's American. We met in Australia. So I suppose I had a get out of jail card in that sense. Australia's a wonderful country, but for me, it was so prominent, I couldn't have had a normal life. I was on editorial cartoon media. So yeah, it was a devastating crucible. And so in the '90s, I was maybe not clinically depressed, but certainly I was down. And so I had to figure, well, what do I do now? I thought it wasn't like appropriate to have my own vision or my own life. I thought that was almost narcissistic. You have no right to your own life or vision. It has to be in the service of a greater cause. In my case, the family newspaper business. And now it's like, gosh, is it okay to have my own vision? I don't even know what it would be. I never thought about it. It's a
Right. I mean,
relevant
like,
question.
how old were you when you kind of knew that you would be taking over this business?
I don't know, birth. I mean, it was, other family members might have had a different perspective, but certainly my parents, and for a variety of reasons, I would have been, if I'd been patient, the major shareholder amongst the family members. So there was some practical reasons. Yeah, there were articles like, young Warwick, because my dad was so Warwick Fairfax, could have had it all, blew it, young, naive kid who's just hot-headed. Yeah, at least until recently, that was my Wikipedia entry. So, sort of the image and the Australian public mind. Still to this day, it's pretty close to that. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow. And so you were 26 when all this happened, which I think about my daughter. She's 26. That's a lot for, would be a lot for her to take on. And I can see that that was, that's understandable that that was a lot for you. And so why do you call it a crucible moment?
So really a crucible is a tragedy, something that's very painful. It could be your fault, which largely wasn't my case. It could be something that was done to you. We mentioned earlier, I have my own podcast, Beyond the Crucible, and we've had guests who've had physical crucibles, survivors of abandonment or abuse, illness. And so the crucibles may vary, but it's typically a searing experience in which who you were before is never going to be the same. And so you've got a choice. You either hide under the covers and say, this was unfair, what they did to me was unspeakable, or what I did was stupid, but I was more in the what I did was stupid category. And you can either just moan away the rest of your 30, 40, 50 years, and eventually we all have an expiration date. Or you can say, yes, what I did was wrong or stupid, or what was done to me was awful, but how can I learn from this? How can I use this to lead a life of significance, which we call a life on purpose dedicated to serving others? So you don't always have a choice about what was done to you. Even if you made a mistake, you can't undo the mistake, but you do have a choice of how you move forward, how you move onward. And that's a
Sometimes it's
choice
hard
we
to
all
see
have.
that, right? If you're just really
Oh,
you said you were down, and I mean, how do you
yeah.
pull yourself out of that? How do you see that there's a way forward?
Well, for me, it took years. I mean, I was just in this unrelenting cycle of how could I be so stupid? I had a Harvard MBA. How could I make those assumptions? I mean, I was just beating myself up relentlessly. But, it's really through baby steps. In my case, I, as you know, live in Annapolis, Maryland, which you're very familiar with the U.S.
Hmm.
Naval Academy, been there 30 years. And so I got a job in a local aviation services company doing business and financial analysis that was pre-internet just, so they didn't really know who I was, and I didn't advertise it, to be honest. But eventually, gosh, at least pretty analytical. I can, do business analysis fairly well. And, it was really bit by bit that I reclaimed my identity, my vision, and it wasn't some well thought out plan. It was just listening to those key moments. So, for instance, I had one key moment, 2003. I got great performance reviews, but I had a "is this all there is" moment. I
Hmm.
was doing fine, but I felt like I wasn't using all the gifts that I'd been given from my faith perspective by God, but from wherever. And I went to a woman that did mid-career executive coaching, and she said, after some tests, you have a great profile to be an executive coach. What's that? Researched it, got certified as an executive coach. From there, I got in a couple of nonprofit boards, church board, school board. I gave a talk in church about, I don't know, what I've been through. People said that was helpful. I thought, gosh, maybe I should write a book about what I went through in the lessons learned format. Gosh, if I have a book to get it promoted, you got to have a brand and a website. And so I get it, Harvard MBA. So it was baby step by baby step. It wasn't this grand plan of, oh, it's Crucible Leadership, it's going to be a book and it's a podcast and
Hmm.
e-courses. It was just, okay, what's the next small step that I can take? And at the time, back in 96, it was, I had some money, but I got to get a job. Yes, for monetary reasons, but just my own self-respect. What can I do? Well, I work in a bank. I was pretty good at spreadsheets one day. Maybe I could start there. It wasn't a grand vision. It's what can I do to use skills and all. And maybe there's an easier path, but I didn't have any help at the time beyond just taking a small step. So really part of the key is just take a small
A
step.
step. Yeah. One of my coaches
Yeah,
says, do what you can with what you have. And sometimes
absolutely.
we don't even, this is interesting. I mean, just give an example to make some context of it. Do what you can with what you have, right? Okay, well, I'm the president of this homeowners association for my condo building the building's almost 100 years old. It's 98 years old. And we have an issue in the basement that requires some temporary shoring and then a permanent fix. And, it's hard to get contractors to help around here, right? And also
Right.
it's kind of construction kind of contracting. And I've got a contracting background, but not construction. So I'm just feeling stressed about it, right? Well, whenever we're feeling stressed and anxious or overwhelmed, part of our brain shuts down. So we don't have access to everything, right? It's just that fight or flight response. And so I'm thinking, oh, I know I'm supposed to do what I can with what I have. I don't even know, like who could I? So finally I remembered, oh yeah, my roommate from the Naval Academy is a lawyer that works for a construction firm. And she's been doing it for so long. So I can ask her some of these questions, about how to approach this situation. And so that's just an easy example to show, a little example to show that when we say do what you can with what you have, it's also like calming down, maybe saying a prayer or meditating or getting yourself centered so that you can use your whole brain to think about that. You can use your whole brain to think about, well, what could I do with what I have? Or what are the gifts or the opportunities here for moving forward? But you can't come up with some of those things, number one, on your own when you're stressed. And I think it also helps to have a coach. Like a coach helped me kind of be thinking things through too.
Absolutely. I had a coach for many years, and yeah, I mean, certainly something that, we call it having a team of fellow travelers, and they can be those who encourage you, which is really important. Don't tell you
Yeah.
what to do, just, hey, Warwick, hey, Emily, you're talented, you're qualified, you can do it, rather than, hey, this is what you should do. Not helpful, just encouragement. And
Right.
then those who have complementary skills. I mean, I love writing and thinking and reflecting. I don't particularly enjoy selling or promoting.
Mhm.
Well, I have a team that does things that I'm not good at or don't like to do. And, a smart man or woman realizes you can't have all the gifts. So
No.
what are the things I don't like to do or I'm not good at? And let me surround myself with those people, and let me surround myself with people who encourage me, rather than, in Australia, there's a phrase, the tall poppy syndrome, which is one of the unattractive parts of Australia, which basically means, there can be a tendency, not all, for some Australians to say, "Oh, you can't do that," or, who makes you better than anybody else? And you're sticking your head up, and you think you can do well. Well, gee, don't you think you're better than all the rest of us? And you don't need those sorts of folks.
No,
You
no.
know?
What's your relationship with your family members now? Like after all that's happened, it's been some time. So,
Yeah, good question. I mean, obviously there were some hurt feelings. Now, I mean, from a monetary perspective, they sold out, just before the stock crash at the height of the high 80 stock market. So yes, they got, newspapers had gone downhill since they got the money wasn't really the issue, but they felt forced to sell. So I think over the years, we had family gatherings. I'd say, by and large, pretty good. I mean, do they think what I did was a good thing? No, of course not. Do I think it was a mistake? Sure. I mean, so I'd say by and large, it's good. Without going too far backwards, there'd been rifts in my family for decades before my takeover in 1976. Some other family members threw my dad out as chairman. I was 15 at the time. Loved my dad. Clearly, I didn't think that was the right thing to do. So there are risks before I came on the scene from a career perspective. But I'd say by and large, pretty good. They realized I may have been foolish and naive, but I had good intentions. But yeah, it's by and large, pretty good. It's not, they weren't bad people. So yeah, I mean, not bad considering.
hmm yeah. So when you say what you did, what was it that you did? I mean, your father passed away. You're supposed to be taking over the company. Is there one thing that you did, or just some decisions that didn't go well, or?
Yeah, I think they would say they didn't think there was anything that wrong with the way the company is being run. I mean, I won't bore the listeners with some particular examples of just different a media company that we could have had a piece of, and some crazy capital raising schemes. So there were some legitimate issues, but they would have thought things were not going bad. Their attitude is, look, one of these days you'll probably have a leading role in the company, managing director, chairman, who knows, in a few decades, but just work your way up, learn the business, and that's a reasonable approach. Did I really need to do what I was doing? Probably not. Yes, the stock market price of the company rocketed up. The market felt the company was in play. But, Yeah, I think they clearly felt like what I did wasn't wasn't good at the time. Felt like I had no choice, and in the longer term, I guess the bigger mistake was really I wasn't living my own life.
Yeah.
I wasn't even living my dad's life. He would have been a better philosophy professor. He wrote books about synthesizing different religions, very spiritual in a broad sense of the word. But he wasn't a business guy at all. He
Yeah,
was a
he
writer,
got
philosopher.
he had to take over the job because from his
Right.
dad, right? Or whatever, from
Yeah, it was just
family. Yeah.
generations. And so the biggest mistake I made is I'm not a Rupert Murdoch, take charge kind of person. I'm a reflective advisor. So it was a terrible fit for my skills. If
Mm-hmm.
I'd been smarter, I would have just said, look, I don't want to work in a company. I want to do something else. But the reality is, given the whole duty thing was so hardwired, the only way I would have left the company was if somehow I was forced out or it went bankrupt. I mean, duty's not a bad thing, but it can channel in the wrong direction. Bad things can happen. Again, not against duty. Obviously, if you're in the military, you have to believe in duty, but
Duty, yeah.
it wasn't, to me, it was misplaced. I was sacrificing my life and not honoring my own gifts and talents. So, yeah, that was probably the biggest single mistake, even more than the takeover, sacrificing
Yeah.
my life for some ancestor's vision 150 years before.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes so what does it mean to you to lead a life of significance? To lead a life of significance, do you have to be impacting millions of people or I mean, just what does that mean? Lead a life of significance.
Yeah, I mean, clearly I grew up on a big stage where I thought, gee, in my naive hubris mentality, maybe I could have an impact on the nation of Australia, or maybe my name might be known in the history books. I mean, not very humble, I suppose, but no, it doesn't have to be. We coined this phrase. It could be from the boardroom to the living room. So it could be in your community. Maybe you feel like you're in the inner city and you want to, do up the neighborhood park, make it safe for families and kids. It doesn't have to be, be a general, an admiral, a CEO, or found a nonprofit, cure cancer. Nothing wrong with those things. But it's not like, gosh, unless I change the world and my name is in the history books, I've failed. Not at all. If you have a whole bunch of people making differences in their neighborhoods, it adds up. And even
Yeah.
beyond the adding up, one person, one neighborhood's life changed means a lot. So you can think of significance the wrong way. Oh, I should not even bother because I'm never going to make a difference because I've defined differences so on such a large scale. I've defined it out of existence. I've defined it into the realm of impossibility for me. That's not accurate or helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you have children?
Yeah, sorry,
That's
getting a
okay.
little dry here. Yeah, I do. We have three kids, 31, 28, and 24, boy, girl, boy, and they all grew up here. And yeah, I'm very blessed. Needless to say, as a coach, I'm very focused on them doing what they love and
Yeah.
what they will enjoy. None of this inherited stuff. I didn't give them any family names, at least not that I knew of.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
But
It's like,
yeah,
how did it impact, how did your crucible moment impact the way you raised your children?
massive. I mean, growing up with about as much money, wealth, and status as you can, while I don't have billions, we're certainly, we're somewhat comfortable and pretty comfortable now. I really wanted to make sure, my kids realize that money doesn't make you happy. Nothing against money, but pursuit of money is not the way to
Hmm.
happiness per se. I wanted them to have their own lives and do what they enjoy. And I wanted to be a present dad. Some dads tends to be more the dads work too hard and they're never around. Oh, it's my wife will take care of the kids, and raise the kids, which is not right or appropriate or helpful. Kids need both parents.
Hmm.
So I always was made sure that I was at the, soccer games, dance recitals. And kind of what's amazing, one of the things we do at birthdays or have you, we've got at least two out of my three kids are writers, funnily enough. And so we have them write cards as well as say, what do you most value about whoever's birthday it is? And if
Oh,
it's mine, what's amazing is year after year after year, and they're now adults, my boys who got my wife's genes, so they're more athletic from that side, not from me. They said, Dad, you were at my soccer games, my tennis games, you were always there. Every single card, every single year. So, whole nother subject, but, we talk about quality time, just turning up. It means everything to your kids.
That's part
Saying,
of
oh, I
creating a
was
life, having a life of significance, right? It doesn't,
absolutely.
you impacted your kids, which will then impact their kids, and it spreads out. And you set the example for other parents, like, oh, look, Warwick's always at the games and he's the dad. I mean, yeah, it's those
And
kinds of
just
things.
and having the restraint to not tell your kids what to, I might have opinions like every parent, but my daughter, for instance, she worked for a large faith-based nonprofit in Australia. She's gone on, I don't know, internships with Samaritan's Purse, a big nonprofit in South Sudan, the Congo, it's extremely dangerous places. What am I going to say? Don't go. I mean, we did try that, but she's over
Hmm.
21, and I mean,
Right.
I applaud what she's doing. She has a big heart. Well, now she's doing child life, a completely different career shift, which is working with kids in hospitals. It's different than her writing ability, but who am I to tell her not to do that? She has
Right.
a heart for kids. That's great. I support her. I might ask a couple questions,
Right.
but I'm not here to run her life. It's her
Right.
life. It's her God-given right to choose her own path and to choose the life that she loves.
Yeah.
So yeah, your whole podcast and movement is about in my own small way try to live as much as I can. I really try not to tell other people what to do with their lives, because I had
Well,
that in spades with my own life,
yeah.
trying not
And
to do that to others.
yeah, and you learn that as a coach, right? You learn, like when I was in the Navy, we did a lot of mentoring, and mentoring's not the same as coaching. Mentoring's kind of like, oh, Emily, how did you get where you are? I want to get where you are. And so you kind of give more advice, I think, when you're mentoring. But with coaching, it's asking questions, and becoming a certified coach in the past year and all the training I had over the past 2 years, 3 years of coaching has really helped me with my relationship with my kids.
Huh.
Yeah, because I am able to, have even more so, you know, listen to what they're saying, but not judge, and then not give advice, not try to fix it, but ask them empowering questions, help them figure things out. So I think, you became a coach kind of when your kids were younger, right? It probably
I
helped you.
Yeah, it did. I think probably the last frontier in that is avoiding that with your spouse. It's one thing with your kids to avoid telling your spouse, well, let me help. I mean, I don't know about wives, but husbands especially are notorious for trying to fix their
Yeah.
wives. I mean, it's just an epidemic. So I'm probably step over the line at times, but I really try not to and listen. And actually, I've got a lot of faults. I'm actually pretty good at listening, I have to confess. So but yeah, I mean, it's, we're all imperfect. We all make mistakes. We all step over the line, and you just can't help it, whether it's with your kids, spouse, significant other. But
Right.
just try to respect the fact that they have a right to live their own lives and make their own mistakes, you
Right.
know. And so just honor that.
Yep. Yep. And so you said something in your notes that you sent me about the refining cycle. There's some cycles that you go through in order to move beyond this crucible experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first one, and it's funny, we've done an assessment at Crucible Leadership, and we've we've had about over 8,800 people respond. And what's amazing is over 71% have had a crucible experience, something that was so painful that it fundamentally changed their life. So, crucibles are very common, unfortunately. So the first thing is really to kind of analyze a bit what happened. If it's your fault, like me, largely me, it's like, well, what happened? Well, it's, I was living somebody else's design. I was listening to the bad advisors, not the good advisors, which is a whole nother discussion. It's a series of things, significant mistakes I made. So learn the lessons of it. Part of that moving forward, and every guest we've had on our podcast has proven this to be true, there's an aspect of forgiveness. And we're very clear, it doesn't mean condoning. We've had people who've been abused, so that's
Mm-hmm.
about as hard as it gets,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. So you never condone behavior that's reprehensible. But so forgiveness is not so much for others, it's more to be able to move forward. You're worthy of forgiveness. It's a bit more clear cut when it's your fault. So there is an aspect of forgiveness. Understand your design. I believe we're all designed by God a certain way, whether it's mathematical, artistic, introvert, extrovert. Whatever your design is, don't fight it. So if you're a scientist and you don't have an artistic bone in your body, does it really make sense to devote 10 years of your life to a painter? I mean, if that's what you want to do, great. But maybe it might be better to channel that into the sciences or vice versa. So my framework is don't fight your design. We do have some constraints. We all have some degree of constraints, whether it's
Right.
height, or there's all sorts of things that are not easy to change. So understand your design, and then what a lot of people don't do is understand your fundamental beliefs and values. It's about a particular religion or philosophy. We all believe certain things. It's honoring your own beliefs, treasuring that. Don't ignore that. It's not about other people's opinions, about your own sacred truth, and have an understanding of that. And then, in terms of creating a vision for your life, understanding the lessons from your crucible, understanding how you designed, what you're off the charts passionate about, which will often be linked to beliefs, or it can come from the ashes of your crucible. And then just take baby steps, try different, things, try different small journeys of vision, and gradually over time, a vision that you're off the charts passionate about will happen. I guess the final piece when we talk about life of significance is that our framework is living some narcissistic life. It's all about me, and I don't care about anybody else, and I'll be rich and have Ferraris and boats. Obviously one could debate if it's right or wrong. Even forgetting morality, I don't think any psychologist on the planet will tell you that's a path to happiness. Narcissism is not a path to joy and fulfillment. You might disagree with that value set, but there are certain parts of the human condition you cannot change. And one is we're wired to only get joy and fulfillment if we're serving others or some higher purpose, how we see that. And that could be different for different people. So, embrace certain rules, if you will, of humanity, which, even if you don't think it makes sense, and even if you're a narcissist, which maybe you wouldn't even listen, basically, a life of significance is where joy and fulfillment. I'm sure what you do gives you incredible joy. When I see somebody that says, what you said helped me, as I did when I gave a talk in church all the way back in 2008, the birth of the book, it meant everything to me. It's like a drop of grace. Gosh, my pain, my story can help somebody else.
Yeah.
I don't need 100 stories. One was great. And I've had a few more than one. So
Yeah.
that's really the refining cycle. It's understanding, learning the lessons of your crucible, understanding your design, anchoring in your fundamental beliefs and values. And then from there, you'll find a vision you're off the charts passionate about. Make sure that vision is helping you live a life of significance. That's the way to living a life that you love and other people will actually love because you're helping them.
Yeah. I mean, I think so many of us maybe don't have the similar experience to you, but we grow up being told, you're going to go to college, you're going to do this, you should do that. This is the way you should go. So I guess one thing I'm wondering is, I wonder what would have happened if you didn't, the company stayed afloat and stayed under you.
Mhm.
What do you think? Do you know, would you have finally realized this isn't what I love doing? I want to do something different. I wonder.
It's a great question. That's where I feel like, as a person of faith, maybe there's a divine hand. Maybe somebody out there realized because of my duty, which is so hardwired, I don't think I ever would have left.
Yeah.
Nothing would have got me out of it because I would have thought I'm betraying my dad, who I dearly loved, and my great great grandfather. And he's a person of faith. I'm a person of faith. I mean, sometimes you connect the dots in the wrong way, which I think I
Mm-hmm.
did in some ways. So I think I would have been miserable. I would have been in a gilded cage. Yes, maybe a few $100 million richer, but how much do you need? I'm very comfortable now, but I don't think I ever could have got out. I felt like it would have been betraying my dad. I do not believe I could have got. You could have given me decades of coaching, but I'm betraying my dad. I mean, anything's possible. I think it's highly, highly unlikely that I ever would have left. I think this is the only way I could have left, is the way it happened. Not that it's good with the pain and the 4,000 plus employees, and
Yeah.
so like tried to do it, but No, I think for my own life, I said recently, it was really deliverance getting out of that company,
Well, I
getting out of
think
the
that,
gilded cage.
we tend to sometimes look at things as either good or bad. And a
Hmm.
lot of our stress can come from, what we think about a circumstance or a situation instead of just accepting it as it is. It happened. We create a lot of stress for ourselves trying to wish something were different or fight something. And, the book Untethered Soul is a good book that talks about that. It's like, how do you how do we accept what has happened and move forward? So what are the things that you cover in your book?
Well, it's in my book. I obviously talk about my story and the story of my family. My dad's Warwick Fairfax, and the founder of the company, John Fairfax, and just the great lessons learned from their lives. John Fairfax, certainly, he went through a lot of crucibles, and it's just remarkable his ability to forgive and move forward and be, a big person,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. So there's that strand. There's also a story from faith leaders, some in the Bible, Gandhi, and it doesn't so much matter whether you believe in that particular faith perspective, but learning from people that made big mistakes
Mm-hmm.
and had to have some degree of contrition. And as somebody that I've always loved history, there's stories of historical leaders. Yes, I've always loved American history. It's my favorite part of history. Even growing up in Australia, I had a history teacher that loved American history. So,
Okay.
power of teachers. And so obviously there's stories about, Roosevelt and Washington Lincoln, but my dad was a big Anglophile, so a lot of stories from British history. And with your military background, you would obviously be familiar, Duke of Wellington and the Battle of Waterloo fame in 1815, and then, naval hero, Admiral Horatio Nelson, at Battle of Trafalgar in
Mm-hmm.
1805. And so with all of these strands, what are the things we can learn from these leaders? Even when history, there are certain aspects of how Nelson led that was off the charts relevant to today. The whole Band of Brothers theme comes from Shakespeare, but he had a band of brothers, of captains. I think about, was it 14 out of 17 became admirals, which is a fairly high ratio, as you would
Wow.
know better
Yeah.
than me. Different era, but I mean, they would just go a fire for him because he backed them up to such a degree. It's like there's pretty much nothing we can do so long as it's bold and innovative. He'll support us.
Wow.
I mean, who has that kind of boss?
Yeah.
It's rare. So
It
no
is
wonder he
rare.
was so successful. But anyway, there are other aspects to him. So basically, it talks about these strands, but really at its heart, it's, and we talk about this a lot on our podcast, Beyond the Crucible, is how do you bounce back from your worst day? How do you not let a mistake or something to you define you? How do you lead a life of significance? There's obviously a lot of leadership thoughts in that book, but it's very personal. I'm very honest about my own failures and stupid decisions. And yeah, it was pretty painful to write. When I write about my own story, after a couple hours a day, I say, like, I got to stop this because this is exhausting.
Yeah, I bet you it was
you
painful.
know,
And, I mean, not all of us have had a crucible experience that's in the public eye, right?
oh my gosh. And you in the book, in the center, you've got photos. One of the things when you're in the public eye, when you make mistakes, or if you don't make mistakes, you have editorial cartoons. So, they're never fun. If it's somebody that you don't like, it's actually funny,
Yeah.
depending on your political or business viewpoint. But if it's you, it's typically not funny. It's
Right.
personal. And yeah, there was like me dressed up as some, Genghis Khan, Mongol raider, young Warwick, as he used to call me, destroyed in a day what took over 100 years to build.
Mm.
Here I am with on a horse, Mongol horse with the whole fur hat and the moustache. And yeah, they were pretty brutal. There was another one. How do you start a small business? Give Warwick Fairfax a big one. I mean, there was
Oh,
some
oh
brutal
man, that
cartoons.
hurts.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it feels like a lifetime ago. But yeah, so not everybody goes through that kind of epic crucible. But many listeners, will have been fired, will have been let down by parents, family members, physical tragedies, abuse. I mean, I've often said on my podcast, especially early on, what I went through was nothing compared to what you went through. I'll give you one small example. We had early on, David Charbonnet was his name. He was a Navy SEAL like his dad, and he was paralyzed in a training accident. And his dad said, in all honesty, and you would know better than me, you don't joke about this. He said, my son would have been as good a SEAL as any SEAL. Right? If you're a SEAL yourself, you don't say that idly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said to this guy, and he's, maybe, I don't know, early 30s. He now runs a clinic for vets in San Diego that has some of the top equipment, you would find. And I was almost apologetic, saying, look, what I went through is nothing compared to what you went through. And he said, you know what, Warwick, your worst day is your worst day.
Yeah.
And that was so generous of him. But I learned a lot from him. And so it's easy to say, oh, I went through is nothing like what you went through or whatever. Your worst day is your worst day. If you feel like today you're at the bottom of the pit and it's miserable, it's not a competition. It's not a scorecard.
No.
So don't be ashamed or feel like, oh, I shouldn't be miserable because I have a friend that went through so much worse and I feel embarrassed. No, your worst day is your worst day.
Yeah, that's good advice, because a lot of times we're still feeling bad, but we diminish that and don't, I think the other thing I've learned is how important it is to feel those feelings and don't minimize them, but feel them, let them flow through your body instead of just ignoring them and shutting them down. I did that a lot for a lot of my life. And one of my past guests, I think I say this on every episode, she said, when you shove your feelings to the basement, they lift weights. And when I went on your show, I was talking about my Crucible experience, which is,
right.
Right after I retired, when my former husband died, my kid's dad, and, all the feelings that I had shoved to the basement because I was so busy working and raising kids as a single parent, came back. And so the important thing is to feel them, don't diminish them, acknowledge them, name them, talk about them, and let the energy flow out of you. Don't fight them and don't shove them down and ignore them.
What you're saying, Emily, is so important. I know it's your podcast, not mine. And my podcast, I say, listeners, pay attention to what Emily just said. So forgive me. But it really is important because, I have a lot of faults because I'm almost hyper-reflective, especially over the last, I don't know, decade or more. If I'm in pain, I'm confused, I'm fearful, I have to understand what it is. I have to kind of figure it out. If it's like in a business setting, it might be with my team. If it's something personal, I'll talk to my wife. And obviously, we've married over 30 years, so she knows me.
Mm-hmm.
So, Gail is her name. I say, Gail, I just feel like scared. I feel fearful. I don't know what's wrong. And we'll talk about it, and she'll throw a few trial balloons, and eventually we'll figure it out. And being people of faith, I pray about it and all. But it's really helpful because if I know what it is, then I can figure out a way to move on, whether it's forgive myself, or it's okay to be uncertain, but more than half the battle is understanding why we're fearful, afraid, angry. We're all human.
Right.
It's not weakness to be fearful and angry and afraid and depressed at times. Everybody on the planet is.
Right. And sometimes the reason easily, but sometimes you're like, something's wrong. I just don't get it. And you have to really slow down and do that reflecting and say, oh yeah, that's what it is. That's really
and don't be
eating
afraid
at me.
of asking a spouse, a partner, a good friend. You might feel it's humiliating. No, maybe they'll respect you for actually having the courage. So many people don't. I'm very reflective, so I can do a lot of it myself to a degree, but there's a point at which you can't, I don't care how smart you are, you can't do it all yourself.
Right.
Typically, you need another person to help. I'm all for counseling. I've gone through counseling, that's helpful. But sometimes, a friend can help too.
Right. Yeah. It's important to have friends and to make time for them. So your podcast, Beyond the Crucible, where you interviewed different people about their crucible moments and what they've learned. Yeah. How long have you been doing your podcast?
Oh, a few years now. I think we have over, is it 100, 120 guests? I'm not sure, but I feel like I've learned so much because they're all in the sort of, they've been through a crucible. Obviously wouldn't have them on if they hadn't got beyond them in some fashion, because
Mm-hmm.
we want to give people hope, not to depress our
Right.
listeners, obviously. It's all hopeless, give up, jump off a bridge. I mean, that's not really what we're trying to promote.
Mm-hmm.
But just, I mean, I'm staggered by how much I've learned. I mean, just a couple of examples. We had a woman, Stacey Kopass, that was very athletic growing up outside of Sydney, and she dove into a above ground pool and was diagnosed as a quadriplegic.
Mm.
Now, a lot of 12, 13-year-olds are told by their parents, don't dive into an above ground pool. And when you're that age, you think you're bulletproof. Again, she was very athletic. And so she went through suicidal thoughts and, various potential actions. Now she speaks and consults. And she said to me, what I went through was a blessing. Well, how in the world can that be a blessing? I'm not a psychologist. I've heard of reframing, but that's ridiculous. But I guess her point is the person she is now wouldn't be the same. I had a recent woman, Sarah Willoughby, who's English, but now lives in Australia. She went through secondary infertility. And I've never heard of that before. I've heard of infertility, but secondary infertility is you get pregnant once you have a child, but then for some reason you can't have any more kids.
Oh,
And
wow.
so she went through every treatment you can imagine, and which one almost killed her. And so she wrote a book called Infertility Saved My Life. That to me makes no sense, obviously. But, but she was judged. There were some women, especially, who's like, you're complaining you can't get pregnant again. I wish I could get pregnant the first time. So what in the world are you complaining about? Like a lot of things, unless you've been through it,
Right.
you understand it.
Right.
But, again, I don't pretend to say what these two guests are saying is right or wrong, but that notion of just reframing what you went through, what's the good that can come out of that crucible they went through? There's a healthy element of it. I'm not saying you should all, embrace the mantra of these two people,
Right.
but there's an aspect that we can learn from it.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, I put your podcast up here. It's Beyond the Crucible, so people can listen to that. And then your book is Crucible Leadership, Embrace Your Trials to Lead a Life of Significance. And then folks can connect with you on LinkedIn and also your website, which is crucibleleadership.com. And I'm assuming that they can order the book there and find out more about your coaching
Absolutely.
and all that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the book's on, Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and, wherever books are sold. It's, yeah.
And then you have a Facebook page, Crucible Leadership. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I commend you, Warwick, for sharing your story and then also starting the podcast, writing your book, and leading a life of significance, setting the example for how we can all do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel blessed to be doing what I'm doing, and I have a wonderful team that helps me do what I do and do the things that I don't enjoy. And, one of the things I really try to keep centered on, I think we all have to be centered, whether it's faith, spirituality, philosophy, is I love doing what I'm doing, but it doesn't make me a better person. If I reach one more person or one more person reads my book, or I have one more good guest, it doesn't make me a better person. So if you're not careful, I mean, people in ministry can fall into that trap. Oh, I have a bigger church. And again, I'm an elder in a non-denominational church in Annapolis, so I get it. But, if you're not careful, you can start to feel like, okay, now that I'm at X level, I'm big time, I'm a better person. Look how many people I'm helping. So don't get caught up. Even doing good can be turned into something bad. If you believe
That's
in
true. You can get caught
good
up in
versus evil, dark versus light, kind of the whole Star Wars thing.
How many likes do
Just
I have on my posts? So no one's liking them. So, that must
exactly.
mean I'm
So
not making a difference and whatever.
I guess one maybe a theme I'd really encourage listeners to think about is whatever your spiritual philosophical anchor is, take time to meditate, pray, read, whatever your go-to system is. And you just got to keep anchored with a few close friends, spouse, significant other. By all means, live the life that you love, live a life of significance. But don't think all this doing makes you a different person. Keep humble, always try to learn, because if you're not careful, one day you're doing a lot of good, and it's easy to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory.
Mm-hmm.
And your ego can get warped by success, and you can say, Warren Lee, you've changed. You're not the person, you were on a great track, you've changed. And, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, you're just believing your own press clippings. It's like, it's so sad, you had this
Hmm.
great vision and it's now got tarnished, you know,
Yeah.
and you don't want to be that person. The only way that happens is stay true to your mantras, philosophy, whatever that is. You've got to find a spiritual, philosophical framework that keeps you centered every day. And ideally, some other people who, same kind of philosophy, or people that can encourage you, whatever that means to you. But yeah, it's so important.
Yeah. That's great. That's great advice, Warwick. So Sonia, Sylvia, Shannon, James, who we have, Enrique, Elizabeth, Sylvia, thank you all for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. And for everybody who listens when this becomes a podcast, I greatly appreciate you all. Warwick, I don't know if you know, but I'm winding down my podcast. So you're one of my last few guests. I'm going to end it
Oh,
at
wow.
I think November 2nd is the last podcast episode I'm going to do. That'll be a solo cast where I'm
Uh-huh.
talking about kind of what I've learned. But 3.5 years, I'm just feeling ready to I want to create more time and space for myself to do some hiking.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll write a book. I don't know, but I've really enjoyed doing the podcast, but I just feel like I need a break.
There are seasons for everything. And
Yeah.
just because you start something doesn't mean you have this moral duty to keep, it going forever. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously in my case, 150-year-old family business, it'd be hard to have a 150-year-old podcast because, we don't tend to live that long. But whether it's
Hmm.
10, 20 years, yeah, you have to live the life that you love, and you shouldn't feel obligated to do something forever. But that's not easy to end something because you feel guilty.
I know
Or
you
you
do.
can
You
feel
can.
guilty.
Yeah, you can. And I wanted to end it before I'm like just dreading doing my podcast because I don't dread doing it. I love doing it.
Right? Yeah.
So I wanted to end it when it felt right. And I've one of my coaches talks about like listening to your longings or discontent. When sometimes we just kind of
Absolutely.
keep going down a certain path because that's the path we're on and that's what we're supposed to do. And lately I've noticed, I don't really even I'm not feeling like posting on LinkedIn or on Facebook
Mm.
and so I haven't been. I've just like I think I'm going to kind of I mean this sounds weird because we just went through COVID, but I'm going to kind of go into hibernation a little bit. Maybe just take a break from even social media over the winter and
Yeah.
just be,
Yeah.
which
You,
is
you
a
should.
big step for me because I am have been that hyperachiever, achieve,
Right.
and I never took a breath really after I even retired. And so it's taken me a lot of working on myself to get to this point where I feel like I'm taking a break.
Where it's like it's okay for Emily to be and
Yeah.
not do for a season. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're a terrible person.
No.
But
And
you
it's
know,
taken a
those
long time for me to get there.
those tapes are hard to unlearn. You know,
Hmm.
it doesn't go away easily. It's not like, not to prolong it, but when I go back to Australia, it's not like, oh, there's no pain. It's painful when I go back to Sydney because
Yeah.
I'm reminded of all the mistakes I made, the dysfunction. Well, when you have a lot of money and power, it tends to produce some level of dysfunction and broken relationships. And leaving aside my whole role in it, it's just like, gosh, this it's not always fun. It's not always good for me to go back to the old neighborhood, if you
Yeah.
will. So yeah, I mean, I'd like to see family, but it'd be hard for me to live there permanently. So, and that's okay. You know,
Hmm.
you just got to be in the environment, do what helpful for you. And living a life of obligation is overrated. You know,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
what even how other people say, oh, well, this is who Emily Harmon should be. Well, they don't get to determine that. You do, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that it's taken me a while to get there because when I started my own business, it's like, oh, well, you're supposed to post. I don't know. They have all this advice, right? You got to get your website
Right,
for SEO, and then you got to post this many times a
right,
day, and then you've got to have video clips, and you got. And I'm like, finally, I'm just like, I'm done. I'm gonna do what feels good to
right.
me, and not what
Yeah.
everybody else said made them successful, because it's not feeling good to me.
Well, and define successful. It's like,
Right.
what does that mean? How many likes? How many people following LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever would that, you get to define what success means.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you so much for being my guest tonight. Thank you all for watching tonight. I really appreciate you. I appreciate everybody who listens later to when I publish this as a podcast. I do love doing this, and I'm going to miss it, and it's time to move on. So a few more episodes and I'll still be around. All right. I'll see you guys next week. Next week I'm interviewing Barbara Bell. She's a Naval Academy grad and a friend of mine, and we're talking about her book, Flight Lessons, Navigating Through Life's Turbulence and Learning to Fly High. So that'll be a fun interview. See you guys next week. Onward Live is sponsored by Emily Harmon Coaching and Consulting. Visit my website, emilyharmon.com, to learn more about me and my coaching programs. I'd love to help you create a life you love living. Remember, every adversity is our own personal university. Sometimes the lessons are difficult, and we must learn from our experiences. Vulnerability is your superpower. You are lovable and worthy. And we discuss these topics and more because professional is personal. Thank you for joining us and engaging with me and my guest. I look forward to seeing you next time.